Hi everyone, thanks for having me with you today at the conference, and thanks so much for the opportunity to speak. I'm really sorry I can't be with you today. Chris and the team invited me to Perth today, but I'm afraid I'm stuck in London. But I did really want to contribute to the event. As some of you might know, local and community energy is still very much a passion of mine, which I've carried over from my time in the Scottish Government to this job here in the Committee on Climate Change. So I'm afraid I'm joining you by video only today, something I hope I can rectify at next year's conference. But what I really wanted to talk to you about today was the report that we published last week, our Net Zero report, which had some pretty fundamental recommendations for government within it. Now, as you might know, the UK Committee on Climate Change, which I now head up, is the UK and the Scottish Government's independent advisor on climate change. And last October, ministers from Edinburgh, from Westminster and from Cardiff asked us a fairly fundamental question. They asked whether we had the right long-term targets for climate change in the UK. And we answered that last week by saying effectively that now is the time to raise our ambition on climate change. And I wanted to speak to you about this today because I can't really overstate how important those recommendations are, and I hope will be for everyone that's in the room today, and especially for all of you who are working on projects now. A very short summary of what we said last week was that the existing targets we have in the UK and in Scotland, that is for an 80% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions from their 1990 base to 2050, well, we said that those targets need to be looked at again, and in fact that we can now see a way to achieving net zero emissions in Scotland and in the UK, the equivalent of a full 100% cut in emissions. And for the UK as a whole, we think that it's possible to get to net zero by 2050. For Scotland, with its greater natural capabilities to store carbon in the natural environment particularly, well, we think the right date for net zero is actually a bit sooner, in 2045. Now, there are some big recommendations, and happily Nicola Sturgeon has already accepted our advice. We are waiting patiently to find out what Theresa thinks, although the signs are good. But this is a massive step. We are saying to government that they have all the tools at their disposal now to get to net zero. We haven't been able to say that to them before. And if they do it, that we can actually end our contribution to rising global temperatures. And of course, we have a long historical legacy of contributing to that problem since the Industrial Revolution. Not only that, but we can do it with known technologies without major change to consumer behaviour and at a cost that is broadly similar to the cost that we forecast when we first advised 10 years ago that 80% was the right target. Now that's very exciting. It's particularly exciting for us, of course, because we haven't had the analytical capability to offer that kind of advice before in the committee. But as exciting as it is to talk about targets, it's also a moment to reflect, I think, on how we get from here to there. We are going to need a major shift in policy at UK level and at Scottish level. We are recommending in this report a transition at a scale that really hasn't been attempted before. Just think about some of the things that we talked about last week. We talked about doubling of electricity demand, quadrupling of low carbon electricity supply, a transition to net zero, to zero carbon in almost every single sector of the economy. That means that every community, every household will have to play a meaningful part in that low carbon transition, really for the first time. And they'll have to be supported by effective policies to make that happen. That means, in summary, we really need a new plan, one that genuinely engages communities and people, of course. And the interesting thing, of course, is that we've achieved a lot without having to do that so far. I mean, one of the most interesting things is that I think last year, 52% of the electricity that you consumed was zero carbon in the UK. That was achieved without having to do a lot of community engagement. And I would say to you that I don't think we're going to get much further on this transition to net zero unless we begin to do the hard miles on genuine engagement. We can't go much further without it. So I hope that our recommendations reinvigorate the discussion of community and local energy, in particular, how we might use a more local approach to decarbonisation, really as a means to get more effective outcomes. For projects, I think that means the ones that will matter most are the ones that really tackle the big integrated challenges, so transport, heat, housing, agriculture, renewables all at once. And crucially to me, the ones that will be successful are the ones that actually engage local supply chains to get the maximum community support for those projects. That's a genuinely just transition. That's the kind of things that we have been looking at in the committee, in which of course in Scotland you've been looking at too through the just transition a commission that has been established. We're going to need that to happen if we're going to be successful in net zero, or we're going to fail. It's that simple. Policymakers need to understand how this is going to work so they can design effective policies around that. And more important than that, communities, I think, need to understand how they can contribute. And I do sense the desire to do just that. What we set out last week was not a full plan to get to net zero, but it was a blueprint. And it is a very challenging blueprint. That would meet our global responsibilities under the Paris Agreement, but I think it would also meet local responsibilities too. And I really hope that what we have recommended to government can be a mission for communities, a mission for local energy. We will need all of that if we're going to achieve it and if it's going to be successful. So I wish you well. I am genuinely sorry I can't be with you there today. I hope Chris brings back some of the reaction to this and the discussion today, and hopefully some positive stories that we can plug into our assessment of how well we're doing on that target against that net zero ambition here in the Committee on Climate Change. We say one more time, we will need all of this and your support to achieve it. So I wish you all the best, and I hope I can see you all again next year.